America's shadow army of scientists. When the war ended, the United States faced a quiet paradox. Publicly, it championed justice, Nuremberg, denazification, trials for war criminals. Privately, it was assembling an army of those same men, not to punish them, but to put them back to work. This was Operation Paperclip, the classified effort to import more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians into American laboratories. The name came from the paperclips attached to their altered dossiers, clipped pages hiding Nazi affiliations, rewritten biographies that turned yesterday's enemies into tomorrow's assets. For the officials running it, morality bent easily under the weight of national security. The Soviet Union had seized half of Germany's research base, and Washington couldn't afford to fall behind. President Truman officially prohibited recruiting active Nazis, but Army intelligence simply retyped resumes and removed problematic lines. The question asked in briefing rooms wasn't who they were, but what they knew. The first arrivals stepped off transport planes in surplus US Army coats that didn't quite fit. Instead of interrogators, handlers waited with handshakes and non-disclosure forms. There was no trial, no punishment, just silent absorption into America's war machine under a different banner. Men like Wernher von Braun, Arthur Rudolph, and Hubertus Strughold, scientists who had built V-2 rockets, tested engines on forced laborers, even designed freezing experiments, were given new homes and blank slates. Their transit paperwork listed them as important specialists. Within months, they were drawing government salaries. At Fort Bliss in Texas and later at Redstone Arsenal in Alabama, von Braun's team resumed the same work they'd done for Hitler, perfecting ballistic missiles. Only the flag above the hangar had changed. They rebuilt captured V-2s, ran flight tests in the desert, and recorded data on high-altitude trajectories. American officers watched the launches with fascination, sometimes forgetting that the crowd cheering beside them had once worn swastika pins. Bureaucrats framed paperclip as a pragmatic necessity. The Cold War was beginning, and the race to understand rocketry and jet propulsion had no pause. Yet to many inside the Pentagon, it felt uneasy. Counterintelligence officers wrote memos warning of moral contamination, then filed them away. In public, the scientists remained ghosts. Their presence wasn't acknowledged for decades. The official records described acquired German materials. The phrase conveniently blurred the line between equipment and men. Wernher von Braun knew how to navigate this new environment. He spoke fluent English within months, played the piano at officers' gatherings, and posed for photographs modeling rockets beside smiling generals. When asked about his past, he answered cheerfully that his only loyalty had been to science. The army agreed. He became the symbolic face of America's new rocket age, clean-cut, visionary, apolitical. Behind the charm stood a technical empire rebuilt in Excel. At White Sands Proving Ground, the desert sky became a laboratory. German assembled rockets rose out of concrete pads, carrying measuring instruments instead of warheads. The data fed into early atmospheric research, then into plans for longer-range missiles. Engineers from von Braun's group quietly taught American counterparts how to build fuel pumps, guidance systems, and telemetry circuits. Each test drew them deeper into US defense strategy. By 1948, the work had gone beyond replication. They were designing prototypes under Army contract. The boundary between imported science and native innovation vanished. Meanwhile, political operatives in Washington worked to keep the public unaware. Journalists who asked inconvenient questions were told these scientists were refugee technicians assisting reconstruction. Only classified committees knew the full scale. Mathematicians, physicians, chemists, aerodynamicists, spread across 66 US installations from Dayton to Pasadena. It was a diaspora of expertise with one shared origin in the ruins of the Reich. Not all assignments involved rockets. Hubertus Strughold, once linked to aviation medicine experiments, was relocated to the Aeromedical Research Laboratory in Ohio. There he developed pressure chamber studies that later underpinned American astronaut training. Arthur Rudolph, chief engineer of the Mittelwerk factory built on slave labor, oversaw the Redstone missile production line for the Army Ballistic Missile Agency. These men lived in pleasant suburbs, their histories sanitized. Neighbors knew them as professors, not participants. Yet inside military circles, admiration blurred with unease. One Air Force colonel described Paperclip as the most efficient theft in history. The scientists produced results, measurable, tangible progress that accelerated every missile program the US touched, but the moral ledger stayed hidden. Behind every launch statistic lay thousands of erased crimes justified as unfortunate context. By the early 50s, the payoff was undeniable. The Redstone missile, drawing directly from V2 architecture, became America's first reliable medium-range ballistic weapon. Its guidance systems refined in classified rooms at Redstone would later push payloads beyond orbit. Von Braun presented test footage to generals, emphasizing precision and altitude while omitting provenance. To the military, it didn't matter. The results placed the United States years ahead of Soviet rocketry, or so they thought. Back in Washington, secrecy deepened. Declassified memos now reveal inter-agency rivalry between the State Department, which opposed sheltering former Nazis, and the Joint Chiefs, who argued these men were strategic assets too valuable to surrender. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency handled compromises. Files re-stamped, cleared, with paperclips pinning alternate biographies. Hence the name that would live in whispers for half a century. As the decade turned, the scientists' world expanded again. In 195, von Braun's entire team moved from Fort Bliss to Huntsville, Alabama, absorbed into the newly formed Army Rocket Center. The town soon became a miniature Berlin, German restaurants, bilingual signs, Christmas markets along southern streets. Locals called them the Germans, half in awe, half suspicion. At night, security patrols circled their housing compound. Inside, new designs were taking shape. Multi-stage rockets designed not just for warheads, but for manned space travel. The duality defined everything. By day, they built weapons for deterrence. By night, they dreamed of exploration. Von Braun often spoke of conquering space for peaceful purposes. His bosses heard only longer range. Both were satisfied. The Redstone series evolved into Jupiter C, then into Saturn I, each step blurring the line between military and civilian ambition. Outwardly, America was chasing the stars. Inwardly, it was perfecting delivery systems. To the wider world, these breakthroughs looked miraculous. Few connected them to the German notebooks locked in US archives. When American officers briefed Congress on missile advances, the phrase domestic development replaced any mention of paperclip. But within defense circles, pride rode shotgun with denial. One general privately admitted, "We took the enemy's brains and made them American." It wasn't wrong. It was simply unspeakable. The ethical question lingered in whispers. Could technology redeemed by democracy wash away its origins? For policymakers facing Soviet atomic tests, the answer was yes. Progress over purity. Scientists who might have faced tribunals instead received citizenship. Advisory panels recommended awards for technical merit. History was rewritten line by line, just as dossiers had been years earlier. The consequences went beyond the launch pad. Paperclip's structure became the blueprint for recruiting foreign expertise throughout the Cold War, defectors from Eastern Europe, later specialists from captured satellite states, all managed through the same channels that once imported Germans. The United States had learned an unspoken lesson. Knowledge outweighed nationality. By 1957, the competition they'd feared arrived anyway. The Soviet Sputnik 1 beeped across global radio frequencies, its orbit tracing a circle von Braun's equations had once predicted. Overnight, America's quiet advantage turned embarrassment. Newspapers demanded to know how the nation that took the Nazi rocket team could lose the space race's opening round. Von Braun himself appeared on television urging support for civilian space programs, assuring viewers that he could build a bigger one. Few realized he already had. In the Cold War calculus, failure and success became identical twins, one feeding the other. Every defeat birthed a new program, every success sparked the next threat. That loop of escalation was addictive, irreversible, and profitable, Engineers called it progress. Historians would call it obsession. Paperclip's graduates shifted from army uniforms to NASA ID badges. The program designed for missile supremacy birthed the Apollo initiative. Every stage, separated by decades, traced back to those first V-2 engineers smuggled across the Atlantic. Their shadow army had not only survived, it had redefined America's technological identity. Still, within classified discussions, unease persisted. Some officials wondered whether, by saving those scientists, they had also inherited the ethos of endless militarization, progress pursued without conscience. Others dismissed doubt as weakness. The results spoke for themselves. Rockets on launch pads, satellites overhead, prestige restored. The morality of origin was written off as irrelevant to national security. By the time the truth surfaced decades later through declassification, most participants were dead or celebrated as pioneers. Museums displayed their achievements without referencing Mittelwerk or Dora. Children visiting exhibits learned names of explorers, not engineers of vengeance. History absorbed them completely, transforming complicity into contribution. And that was Paperclip's final success. It didn't just import knowledge, it rehabilitated it, weaving German science into the fabric of American ambition until the two became indistinguishable. Beneath the glow of progress stood a quiet compromise. That victory meant inheriting your enemy's genius and pretending it had always been your own. As the rockets climbed higher each year, the United States could look up and see only triumph. No one on the ground needed to remember where the equations came from or what they once destroyed. The Shadow Army had done its job. It had built the arsenal, and the myth that would carry America through the Cold War. From battlefield to orbit. In 1947, while the rubble of Europe still smoldered, new battlefields appeared, flat stretches of desert and frozen steppes where silence replaced gunfire. Here, soldiers didn't fight, they measured. They pointed cameras upward, counting seconds until fire rose into the air. Every launch was part victory march, part ghost story, because both sides in this fresh Cold War were flying German ghosts into the sky. At White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico, US Army engineers lifted one of the first captured V-2s onto a launch rack. The vehicle still bore German inscriptions, warnings, fuel labels, hand-stenciled part numbers. Among the crew were several of the same men who had once assembled it for Hitler, now saluting a different flag. When ignition came, desert rocks glowed orange, and the missile leapt from its pad, vanishing into a cloudless sky. Official reports called it pure science, studying atmospheric composition. Privately, generals called it target range extension. Both were correct. Across the world at Kapustin Yar, the Soviet Union's new test site rose out of steppe mud. Its launch pads were crude, built by army laborers under direction from German supervisors shipped from Gorodomlya Island. The R-1, identical in size to the V-2, struggled through early tests, fuel leaks, instability mid-flight detonations. But by 1948, it flew successfully. Soviet newspapers trumpeted it as an all-domestic triumph. The photos, cropped carefully, showed only Russian faces. Behind the cameras, the Germans clapped quietly before being herded back onto transport trucks. These mirrored experiments turned former allies into dueling reflections. Each test was both research and reconnaissance. Both sides tracked the other's launches through radar sweeps and newspaper rumors. US analysts drew circles on maps estimating Soviet range. Soviet spies, inside American laboratories, sent back envelopes of film. The decades-long balance of terror took shape in those first few years, long before bombs were mounted to the tips. By the early 50s, America's Redstone missile rose from von Braun's drawing boards, a taller descendant of the V-2. It could carry a payload hundreds of miles, guided by gyroscopes perfected at Peenemünde. Meanwhile, the Soviets advanced to their R-5, then their R-7, under Sergei Korolov's direction. Their R-7 was massive, 200 feet high, multiple clustered engines, built from lessons learned by both German mentors and native improvisation. It was the first missile capable of crossing oceans, though its builders cloaked the work in agricultural metaphors, calling early models agricultural irrigation rockets in official paperwork. Engineers on both continents knew what these machines really meant. For the first time, national borders could be ignored by velocity alone. A weapon launched from one hemisphere could reach the other in less than an hour. That truth reshaped every military doctrine written thereafter. It also seeded an unexpected idea that the same thrust powerful enough to carry destruction could carry a satellite or a human being into orbit. Inside Redstone Arsenal, von Braun pushed that notion relentlessly. He insisted that rockets could explore space as surely as Columbus crossed the ocean. His supervisors listened politely, but counted range figures, not dreams. Yet even they recognized that higher altitude tests gathered valuable data on re-entry heating and guidance precision. Each high-altitude probe, disguised as scientific research, doubled as trajectory mapping for future intercontinental missiles. In Moscow, Korolev's design bureau faced the same paradox under stricter silence. He referred to his R-7 not as a weapon, but as a carrier vehicle. When he proposed launching a small radio-beeping sphere into orbit, military generals hesitated. Then American U-2 reconnaissance flights began photographing Soviet territory, and suddenly, the symbolic value of reaching space first outweighed restraint. The order came quietly: proceed. October 4, 1957. On a cold night at Turatam Test Range, engineers huddled around monitoring stations. The rocket's engines roared long enough this time, pushing a polished aluminium sphere into orbit. Sputnik 1 began transmitting within minutes, its faint electronic heartbeat bouncing across short-wave receivers worldwide. Each beep confirmed that the Soviet Union had reached beyond the battlefield. The same rocket heritage that once delivered vengeance now defined prestige. In the United States, the reaction bordered on panic. Newspapers screamed, "Red Moon overhead." Military briefings turned into emergency meetings. Congress demanded to know how the nation that housed von Braun's miracle workers had been beaten by their former mentees. Editorial cartoons showed Nazi rockets wearing Soviet stars. For the first time, Americans looked skyward with unease, hearing not inspiration but surveillance. Von Braun himself was furious yet vindicated. He'd warned officials for years that he could achieve orbit if given authority. Within a month, he got it. The Army authorized Explorer 1, America's answer to Sputnik. It launched successfully the following January, carrying scientific instruments that discovered the Van Allen radiation belts. Overnight, a weaponized legacy had become the foundation of space science. Still, beneath public celebration ran a quiet irony. The first vehicles to leave Earth had been built from equations written in German bunkers under Allied bombs. Every trajectory, every guidance algorithm, owed its lineage to wartime experiments meant for entirely different purposes. The Cold War's greatest symbols of human advancement were technically descendants of weapons once designed to flatten cities. Both powers embraced this contradiction. In Washington, the new civilian agency NASA absorbed von Braun's Huntsville team. Its mission spoke of exploration, but funding came through defense budgets. In Moscow, Korolev's bureau, renamed OK-1, answered directly to the military while presenting launches as peaceful scientific milestones. The contest shifted from destructive capability to demonstration, to prove whose ideology could build higher. Rockets became ambassadors, carrying silent flags across the void. Back on Earth, strategy followed spectacle. Satellites could track missile launches, photograph troop movements, relay communications. Space became military property disguised as discovery. The term, dual use, entered policy vocabulary, describing technology that served both bomb and broadcast. For generals raised on tank warfare, this required a different imagination. Wars of terrain had become wars of altitude. By the early 60s, orbital mechanics dominated global diplomacy. The United States deployed early warning satellites. The Soviets tested fractional orbit missiles capable of looping around the planet before descent. Every step referenced the same principle first proven by von Braun's V2. Suborbital flight was only a fraction away from spaceflight. The frontier between war and wonder was a single mathematical adjustment. The psychological impact ran deep. To civilians, the Cold War seemed defined by ideological standoff. To insiders, it was defined by fuel ratios and guidance precision. Intelligence agencies feared not invasion but technological lag. When American students saw Sputnik trace a path across night skies, they were witnessing the lingering brilliance of an enemy long defeated but never erased. Meanwhile, propaganda transformed former Nazi science into universal progress. Magazine covers showed rockets framed against sunsets, captions celebrating human courage instead of industrial inheritance. Textbooks replaced Peenemünde with Cape Canaveral. The past was tidied up for comfort. Few cared that the same aerodynamic equations guided both missiles and moonshots. Yet history left clues. The guidance gyros in early American ICBMs were built using modifications drawn from wartime German patents. Soviet engine combustion chambers retained the structural layout of the V-2's pumps. Even the arrangement of launch control consoles mirrored Peenemünde's bunkers. Technological evolution had streamlined the appearance, but not erased the ancestry. In 1961, when Yuri Gagarin orbited Earth, the cheers in Moscow echoed all the way to Huntsville. Von Braun reportedly watched on television, silent, knowing that the architecture carrying Gagarin into space looked eerily similar to his own cancelled intercontinental designs. The Reich's myth of reaching the heavens had finally come true, but under socialism. 6 years later, when Saturn V thundered off the pad in Florida, sending Apollo missions toward the moon, the symmetry completed itself. The same scientific tree had borne fruit for both sides. From battlefield to orbit, the arc was deceptively smooth. Between the V-2's first scream over London and the lunar landing lay only 25 years, an engineering generation. The Cold War's most inspiring achievements and its darkest threats traced identical lineages. Two superpowers claimed dominion over the skies, yet both stood on foundations mixed equally with ambition and moral compromise. By then, the distinction between victory and inheritance no longer mattered. Rockets erased borders as quickly as they once demolished cities. Humanity had escaped gravity, but not history. The science born for vengeance had carried the species into space, leaving an unanswered question hanging in vacuum.